Hi everyone, my name is Fran Harris and I'm a researcher at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I'm going to talk today about some work that was published last year called The Water Footprint of Diets, a Global Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. Thanks very much for having me at this workshop and for letting me talk about this work. So just as a bit of an introduction to why we did the study, there's a growing literature on environmental sustainability of diets. So this includes things like the greenhouse gas emissions of diets or the land use required to produce diets, as well as, of course, the water use and other metrics. Amongst this growing literature, there has been some evidence, some studies that suggest water might be different to these other environmental impacts. So healthy diets, which usually reduce greenhouse gas emissions as compared to current diets, don't necessarily reduce water use. And also vegan diets might actually even dramatically increase water use of diets. So when we have this disparate literature where there's not a clear conclusion, one way we can find out what the general consensus is by doing a systematic review that finds all of the studies available on a topic area and draws a consensus from them. The water footprint is the most popular metric by far that's used to look at the water use of different diets. And just as a reminder, the water use is defined as the volume of water consumed in the production of an item. So what we decided was that our study would aim to collate and synthesize the evidence on the water use of diets as measured by the water footprint. By doing this, we would quantify which dietary pattern, so which sort of consumption pattern has the lowest water footprint. And we did this through a meta-analysis, through a statistical analysis. And also we wanted to identify the research gaps in the current evidence base. As with all systematic reviews, we did quite a thorough search. So we've looked at 7 different online databases for all studies that included the concepts of water footprint and diet, so variations of those different words. And we found over 6,000 records. So that was the number of studies that contained these 2 words either in the title or abstract. And this led to 231 full text that we had to screen, and finally 41 studies that were included in our study. So 41 studies that had quantified dietary water footprints. So firstly, I'll talk about the results of what we found in terms of which diet has the lowest water footprint. So we grouped the dietary water footprints based on the pattern, and these were things like that were named by the study authors. So healthy diets would be something like a dietary guideline. Reduced animal source food diets are ones that contain perhaps 10% less animal products, or perhaps they've swapped out certain animal products for different plant products. And a no animal source food diet are ones which contain no animal source food, so something that we would call like a vegan diet in the UK. And then we compared these to the average study, that average dietary pattern, the water footprint of the average dietary pattern in those studies. So the results showed that for total and green water footprints, all of these different dietary pattern types had a lower water footprint as compared to average. Just as a reminder, the green water footprint represents the volume of rainfall water use, and in this case, the total water footprint is the combined green and blue water footprint. The blue water footprint is the volume of ground and surface water used, and for this, it was quite interesting because we found slightly different results. So the healthy dietary patterns didn't actually have a different blue water footprint compared to other patterns. And this is when we pulled all of the studies together, all of the estimates from all the different studies based on these dietary patterns. So overall, the consensus shows healthy patterns don't have a lower blue water footprint. And in fact, the changes that are possible by reducing animal source foods aren't quite as big in terms of blue water. So this is quite a concern, given that blue water is one of the prevailing issues for water security. So it means there might be a potential trade-off here between nutrition and water use. However, there was an important spatial variability in the studies found. So The maps here show dietary green and blue water footprints by quintiles, and you can see they do vary around the world, which means that these pooled estimates, although they signify a general consensus, there were differences depending on where the study was carried out and what country and context. And this is partially because of the water footprints actually varying depend on where the food is produced, but also dietary patterns themselves, of course, vary depending on cultural preferences, etc. So that spatial variability is something that we should remember. There were also quite a lot of gaps in the evidence base. So there was low variability in the type of study methods and the data used. So 66% of all studies use national food availability accounts from the FAO. This is a hugely important resource, but unfortunately, it doesn't fully represent actual food consumption patterns. So it tends to overestimate how much food is actually consumed by individuals. Also, it doesn't give any indication of the variation you might find within countries, and that's really important to know for nutrition. Also, majority of the studies, so 88% of the studies, used water footprint data from the WaterStat database. Again, another hugely important database, which is very helpful for this field. However, it's now becoming slightly outdated, so it's from 1996 to 2005. And also, as with all modelling studies, it comes with certain assumptions, and it means that everyone that's using that data from that water footprint database brings those assumptions into all of the studies that are found. So it's quite important that we consider trying to use additional data sources. Furthermore, there was also some improvements needed in the the quality of studies. This is important to note that it's not all studies, but there was definitely some with quite low quality due to perhaps not reporting certain things which should be reported for accountability. But only 4 studies actually provided any measure of uncertainty or range. And this is something that I find quite difficult in environmental fields. For coming from health, we always include a measure of uncertainty or a range whenever we provide any estimate for what the impact of a health intervention is. And so coming into the environmental field where it tends to just be a point estimate, so, the water footprint is X, or if we change the water footprint, we would change the diets, we would reduce the water footprint by 20% or something. That's quite an unusual thing for me to be coming into the realm of. So the problem with not accounting for that uncertainty or range, which there will be a range in possibilities, it means it gives us a false sense of certainty to that data. So that's something that we need to think about trying to improve. Also, very few studies accounted for trade sufficiently. Now, this is really important when we think about the water footprint of diets, because it means that we don't actually account for the water footprint at the place of production. So as they vary a lot spatially, this can have a massive impact on the accuracy of dietary water footprint measures. Finally, one important gap was in the study location. So the data I showed you previously with the maps for all over the world, lots of that data was made available through some global studies which were done, a couple actually by Mika Jalava, who I believe is at this workshop as well. So thank you very much for that data. But the country-specific studies, so ones which looked at just the dietary water footprint in one country and provided a bit of a deep dive and contextual information, was done in not many studies and not many countries, but in particular, there was a gap in low and middle income country context. So only four studies had been done in lower middle income countries, namely Uzbekistan, India, Tanzania, and Uganda. As I said, this means that you don't get that contextual information on what changes are possible, but it also means the evidence isn't as relevant for policymakers or researchers from that area because they can't pick out the information that's relevant for their own context. So to conclude, this systematic review did show that dietary changes may not be a solution to reduce blue water use. So that means we're not going to, through dietary changes, we can't reduce our dependency on ground and surface water. This potentially could be due to the fact that fruits and nuts, which have a really high irrigation water demand, are a big component of healthy diets and also still in diets of reduced animal source foods. So there might mean that there is a bit of a trade-off here between water and health. And the only way that we could get around that is by doing both changes to production as well as consumption. So perhaps changing diets at the same time as improving irrigation efficiency within production for those specific crops like fruits and nuts. However, importantly, these conclusions are not final. There are gaps in the evidence base, and in particular, we need to use other data sources. We need more country-specific studies with context-specific solutions, and we need better modelling techniques that account for trade. Thank you very much.